Hello, everyone. Welcome to Healthy Living Together. My name is Carol Bublitz. I work for Michigan State University Extension, and it's my privilege to be the host today. Today, we will be taking a quick look at what Healthy Living Together is, and it's simply a collaboration of entities in Sanilac County that are led by McKenzie Health System. They include Michigan State University Extension, the Sanilac County Health Department, the great Start Collaborative Sanilac, and the Sanilac County Community Mental Health. So all of us are here to help you on your path to a healthier life. So today, I'd like to remind you your audio's automatically been muted, so you don't have to worry if there's incidental sounds. We would like you to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you have a question, you can click on that, type in your question at any time. And then after the presentation, I'll ask the questions to our speaker and you'll get your answers. And we do encourage questions, so please don't hesitate to ask them. Today's webinar is being recorded, and that link will be sent to you in a follow-up email. Today, we are hearing Laurie Messing speak on preserving your Michigan harvest. Laurie has been with Michigan State University Extension for quite a while, since the year 2000. She's an extension educator and provides research-based information, not only to Sanilac County, but also to St. Clair, Tuscola, and Huron counties. She has quite an extensive list of things she teaches, from serve-safe manager or food handler courses for restaurant workers to things like cooking for crowds for other people who provide food for large groups. Today, the Preserving Michigan's Harvest, she also does things like safe food equals healthy kids, classes on cottage food law, and food safety for food pantries, as well as food safety educational topics by request. Today, as we look at the bounty of beautiful produce we're beginning to see at farmers markets, farm stands, grocery stores, and even in our own gardening, our thoughts do turn to thoughts of let's preserve some of this and have it in the other months when it's not being harvested. And I'm pretty sure you already know that there are better and safer ways to do these things. So let's turn it over to Laurie Messing to hear the current recommendations. Laurie?
Great, thank you, Carol. All right, let me share my screen here a little bit. All right. Oh, whoops. Oops. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Preserving My Harvest. Happy to have you join us this afternoon. And before we get started, I do just want to share a few other opportunities we have through our MSU Extension Food Safety Education and Outreach. Every Thursday, we're doing Preserving My Harvest right now for this session, but every Thursday we offer a Preserving My Harvest class online. It's all free, and it's a different topic every week. So you can see on the screen over the next few weeks, we try to keep them quite seasonal. So you'll notice seasonal topics coming up related to peppers, tomatoes, salsa, since tomatoes will be in abundance here soon if they're not already in your gardens and at your markets. So I will be sharing some follow-up resources with Nina, and you will get those via email. So you can always check out these additional opportunities for taking a Preserving My Harvest class. Also want to make sure you are aware of the fact that we have a Facebook page. It's called Think Food Safety, and we would encourage you to use it, share it, like us, follow us, and get it out there and help us as much as you can. It's got lots of great information about upcoming classes, lots of preserving tips. We do a lot of preserving tips this summer through our social media outreach on Think Food Safety. So you'll see that a couple times every week, as well as food recalls, videos, just lots and lots of information to help you make good choices and keep food safe for yourselves and your families. So follow us on Facebook, Think Food Safety. And the last, oh, whoops, that didn't go through there, did it? Did it slide through? Let me go back to that. Oh, okay, maybe you did. The last thing I want to share is our food safety hotline, and we would encourage you to keep this number and again, share it with others. It is a resource available to you where you can call and speak with one of our food safety team members and ask any sort of food safety question you might have. So this is really helpful. Yes, you can Google things and look things up, but it's nice to be able to talk to a person and get your questions answered as well. So give us a call Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. at 877-643-9882. And we welcome and encourage your call and your questions. So welcome. Today's session will focus on canning. And so whether you are a beginner, or a seasoned home food preserver, we are glad you joined us, and hopefully you will pick up a couple new pieces of information. Most times people are always sharing that they learned a couple new things, even if they've been preserving for quite a while. And we have had over the past few years a lot of new preservers, or those who have been doing it for less than a year. So we're happy to share that education. And I'm not sure, I can't remember, Carol, if you mentioned, but please do ask questions. Use the Q&A option there to ask questions, and we'll definitely answer your questions throughout the session or at the very end. So we certainly welcome that this afternoon as well. All right, so before we get started with the canning process, let's start with our produce. So make sure you purchase or pick quality produce. So whether you're growing your own produce out in your gardens or purchasing from a farmer's market, it's important to inspect it carefully. Bruises and any tiny surface cuts can allow bacteria to get into your food. So you want to trim away any blemishes, but it is not recommended to preserve by canning produce that has any sign of disease. There's lots of bruises or cuts. It is not recommended to use for preserving. Unless produce is preserved in some manner, it begins to spoil soon after harvest. And the spoilage can be caused by microorganisms, like a mold or a bacteria. It can be caused by physical damage or changes like bruising or wilting. It can also be caused by enzymes, ripening action that changes the flavor, the texture, and the color of your produce. So if you have your own garden, pick produce at the proper stage of maturity. Don't pick things that are underripe or overripe. The quality of your fruits and veggies will not improve after harvest. So what you put into the jar is what you're going to get out of it. Once harvested, chill your fruits and vegetables as soon as possible. And if possible, harvest that produce early in the day. Or if you're going to the market, try and go early in the day. And that way you can do your shopping early or your picking early and then return home to either chill or process that produce and preserve it that same day. Another thing we'd like to talk about before we get into the canning itself, the method, is recipes. We get so many questions about recipes, and we want to make sure you understand best practices related to recipes. So it's fun to try new recipes, right? We get sick of doing the same thing over and over and, using old recipes or using the same ones week after week. But with home food preservation, it's really critical for you to only use research-based recipes. Food preservation is a science. So keep that in mind. It's not like cooking where we can be creative in the kitchen and add a little bit of this or a little bit of that, or doctor up a recipe to meet our likes and our needs. That's fine with cooking, but with preserving, we can't do that. When we preserve, we need to remember that any changes in the acidity level of that food product, the density of the food product, could lead to a foodborne illness if it is not processed properly and correctly. So while the internet is filled with many, many ideas when it comes to canning, you can do a search and find, thousands of recipes for canning a certain item. Unfortunately, we need to encourage you and recommend that you only use research-based resources that have been tested for their safety. And then follow those directions exactly. Again, don't add this ingredient or delete that ingredient. You need to follow the recipes as they are written, as they were tested in a laboratory. Now, saying that, I don't want you to feel like, oh, geez, there's probably hardly any recipes I can choose from. What am I going to prepare? What am I going to make? I can guarantee with these recommended resources you see on the screen, there are hundreds and hundreds of recipes, so many options that you will I guarantee you'll be able to find products that you like and want to try. I will share these resources. Nina will via email, but these would be the resources we would recommend. So the first one to the left there is called Michigan Fresh. This is our MSU Extension website, our program for Michigan Fresh, where we have fact sheets on how to use, store, and preserve pretty much everything that grows in the state of Michigan, all fruits and vegetables you can imagine. So you see the pressure canning basics fact sheet here, but we have sweet corn, we have tomatoes, we have hot peppers, we have peppers, we have blueberries and peaches and pears and plums. And I mean, the lists go on and on and on and on. There's probably over 50 total with fruits and vegetables on our website. So I'll send you that link via Nina tomorrow or later today, depending on when she sends that out. The second one is the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Complete Guide to Home Canning. This is a great resource. We'll send a link to that. There's also, they sell this on Amazon. So you could even order the book on Amazon. I think it's, I don't know, $15, $18, but it's got many, many canning recipes. Next, we have this National Center for Home Food Preservation, homefoodpreservation.com. And they produce a book called So Easy to Preserve through the University of Georgia Extension. And this is a really nice resource for not just canning, but freezing, dehydrating. It's like 400 pages. It's a very nice book with many, many, many research-based recipes. And lastly is the Ball Blue Book. It is updated, and we do recommend you use an updated version. And we heard it will be updated again next year, but currently that's what it looks like, the picture on your screen. So please consider when you're canning to use these recommended resources. And again, there's many, 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 many recipes for you to choose from. We get the question a lot about family recipes related to preserving recipes at home. And family recipes are part of family traditions, connecting generations and reminding us of memories. A lot of people grew up learning how to can with their parents or grandparents or aunts and uncles or doing it as a family. And we understand that. But again, we need to help you think through the idea that family recipes or old canning books probably have recipes that are no longer recommended. Old methods, ingredients that are not recommended anymore. So research has provided that scientific knowledge that these recipes might not be adequate with proper processing times or proper methods or acidity levels or temperatures. And you want a safe home canned product. So here's our recommendation. If you have a favorite family recipe that you want to can or you have canned in the past, but you're not sure if it's safe, the best thing to do is to take those research-based recipe resources I just showed you and find a recipe as close as you can to your family recipe. So find one pretty similar. Process it according to that research-based recipe so we know it's safe. And then this fall or this winter, when you go to open that jar of, let's say it's salsa, or maybe it's salsa is a good example because we have lots of salsa questions come up. So you go to open the jar of salsa, then you can add those other ingredients that make it taste like your family recipe that you remember. So that really is the best way to do it, to make sure it's safe and you can still enjoy it as you remember it from your childhood or from your family. One thing I want to mention before we again get into the processing is let's look at a few key phrases and terms related to food preservation. So one is packing. So there are two types of packs that you can use when you are filling your jars. One's called raw pack and one's called hot pack. So raw pack is kind of like it sounds. It's putting cold food firmly, packing it into a jar, a hot jar, then pouring boiling liquid over the food according to your research-based recipe. So then hot pack means you have cooked that food in hot liquid before you pack it into your hot jar. So the cooking liquid is then poured over the food in the jar. With this raw pack versus hot pack, you will need to, again, watch for what your research-based recipe recommends. Sometimes you can choose raw pack or hot pack for a product. You can do what you prefer. Other times it will tell you you can only hot pack. So again, you've got to follow that recipe to know for sure what the recommendation is for that product. And let's look at your lids and your jars on the next couple of slides. We do recommend a two-piece lid, which includes the metal lid itself and that screw band or ring, whatever you like to call it. The lids, which are held in place by that screw band, the screw band goes on top of the lid. If we look at the lid on the right side of the picture there, you can see under the lid, the outer ring of the lid is filled with that gasket, that sealing compound. It's usually like a rust-colored color. This compound is what seals during and after processing once that vacuum seal occurs. When you heat the jars, the lid gasket softens and flows just a little bit to cover the jar sealing surface. Even with the gasket compound in place, air is still able to escape during that processing time inside your canner. Then as the jar cools, the gasket forms an airtight seal. So we recommend only buying enough lids to get you from year to year, although often the unused lids will work for about 5 years. Always use a clean, damp cloth to wipe off food or liquid from the jar rims before you place that lid on, because anything that comes in between that jar rim and your lid could impact your jar from sealing or not sealing. So even a tiny grain of salt or a little bit of debris from your tomato product, anything like that could stop your jar from sealing. So we have our jar lids, we have our screw bands, and they work together when processing inside your canners. As far as your jars, canning jars can be used and reused from year to year as long as they are in good condition, no nicks or cracks or chips. Also, please make sure you are using jars that are intended for canning. Standard canning jars designed and tempered to specifically withstand the heat that will occur inside that water bath or pressure canner. When you get ready to start preserving for the day or for the afternoon, you want to wash all your jars in warm soapy water and dry them. You do want to keep your jars hot because as you fill your product, you need to fill your product into hot jars. This will help cut down on the risk of jar breakage. So you can keep them in a large pot on the stove that's boiling with water, or some people do it in a dishwasher. You can keep it hot in there. But you will notice in your recipes that it does state to put your product into hot jars when filling. A little more on filling your jars. So after you prepared your produce according to your research-based recipe, it's time to fill your jars. So we recommend using a wide mouth funnel only for the reason it does help kind of cut down on some of the mess. You certainly don't have to have one, but it's kind of nice to have one in use. So ladle your product into your clean, hot jars. Your recipe will tell you how full to fill them. You will need to leave headspace in each jar, and we'll see that on the next slide. But you'll want to follow those recommendations for how much to put into each jar. You'll want to use a bubble freer or a plastic knife. Anything like that you have at the bottom end of a clean utensil. Anything plastic, nothing metal, because you don't want to scratch the inside of your jars with something metal. That could lead to breaks and cracks. But use that bubble freer to run around the inside of the jar. And then that will release any air bubbles that are in the jar. One important thing to make sure you do. Then you'll want to wipe the jar rim to prepare it for placing the lid on top. So I said we talk about headspace. So here's a nice demonstration. Some of you might have a headspace measuring tool. You can purchase those pretty much anywhere canning supplies are sold, as well as at local department stores, grocery stores, hardware stores, things like that. And so it is a nice tool to have because it will help you to measure the amount of space between the inside of the lid and the top of the food or its liquid. So follow your research-based canning recipe to calculate the headspace. It could be a 1/4 inch, could be a 1/2 inch, could be 1 inch headspace, depending on what that recipe says. Now, often people kind of think, well, headspace, is it really that big of a deal? And actually it is. Leaving the specified amount of headspace in the jar is important to ensure that your vacuum seal forms. If you leave too little headspace, the food may expand and bubble out. So that means you fill the jar too full. And then your lid may not seal because it might seep out under your lid. If you leave too much headspace, so that means you don't fill it full enough, you leave too much room at the top, the food on the top is likely to discolor. And also the jar will probably not seal because there won't be enough time during processing to drive all of the air out of the jar. So headspace is key. So read that, whether it's a 1/4 inch, a 1/2 inch, or 1 inch. And the little tool here, it looks like a stair step. It actually does have written measurements on there, so you can easily see how much headspace you have. And lastly, to close our filled jars to get ready to process here next, we use the term fingertip tight. This is how tight you should put that screw band or metal ring onto your jar on top of your lid. You want to turn it so that you're not using too much force. So turn the ring kind of just till it stops. You don't have to try and tighten it as humanly possible, as tight as humanly possible. That could actually cause the jar not to seal as well. The lid might buckle. So again, just turn it until it kind of stops with your hand. Fingertip tight is the phrase we use to describe that. All right, let's process. So when we can, we talk about processing in terms of 2 ways. We talk about processing high acid foods and low acid foods. So we group those foods into 2 categories. So when you think about the foods you and your family enjoy, and you think about what you want to preserve, think about, and you have to figure out if it's a high acid or a low acid food, so you know how to safely preserve it in your canners. High acid foods are those with a pH of 0 to 4.6. 4.6. They contain enough acid so that the botulism spores will not germinate. High acid foods include things like most fruits, jam and jelly, tomatoes and figs that have been acidified following your research-based recipe. Also things like pickles, relishes, other products with a large amount of acid, as well as sauerkraut. So these are all what we call high acid foods. And so if you're thinking about preserving these types of foods, you can preserve your high acid foods in 2 ways, either in a water bath canner or in an atmospheric steam canner. So we'll take a look at each of these and see how they work next. Starting with your water bath canner, some key components include a rack on the bottom to keep the canning jars off the bottom of the pot. This allows for proper water circulation underneath and around the jars. There also needs to be a tight-fitting lid to keep the heat inside and to keep that water boiling, because in your water bath canner, you have to have that water boiling during the whole processing time. Another important note about water bath canners is they need to be tall enough to allow for 1 to 2 inches of water above the canning jars, whether pints or quarts. On the slide, you can see 2 types of water bath canners. On the left, we have an enamel canner, like the one pictured on the left. These are inexpensive and usually pretty easy to find. They might be black, they might be blue. It just depends on what you can find in your local store or online. On the right, you'll see a stainless steel canner. And these can also sometimes be found in stores. I guess I haven't seen them in stores as much as I have the enamel canners. So again, you could find it online if you're looking for a stainless steel one. Always make sure they have a rack inside, whatever type you're going to buy. And just as a price point, the enamel canner is usually around $30. I guess the stainless steel, I haven't checked out the price on that one in a while, but fairly inexpensive though to get started. So once you've prepared your product according to that research-based recipe and filled your jars, like we just talked about, it's time to process those high acid foods in your water bath canner. So you'll start by filling your canner half full of water. It takes quite a bit of water. Then preheat the water to either 140 degrees for raw pack or 180 degrees for hot pack. Place your filled canning jars on the rack. And then once you have them all on the rack, you're going to lower that rack into the water. The water must cover the jars by at least 1 to 2 inches, like we said. So a good tip is really to have some extra water heating in a pan on your stove. So that way, if you realize, oh, there's not enough water here, you can easily add water to your canner. So once the jars have been added and there's enough water, place the lid on the canner, turn the heat up to high, and wait for the water to come back to a boil. We have to have a full rolling boil before we start our timing process. So once it's boiling, full rolling boil, get your timer out and set it for 20 minutes, for 10 minutes, for 30 minutes, whatever the research-based recommended recipe tells you to do. Okay, so I want to show you a short little video here. And I might have to, where's my option? Oh, there it is. Let me make sure my sound is on here. Okay. All right, I'm going to show you a quick video on using a water bath canner so you can see how it all works.
Using a water bath canner to preserve high-acid foods like fruits, pickled products, acidified tomatoes, and jams and jellies is a simple process. Start by filling the canner half full of water and put the lid on the canner. Preheat the water to 140 degrees Fahrenheit for raw pack and 180 degrees Fahrenheit for hot pack foods. Once the water's hot, remove the lid and carefully place filled jars onto the canner rack. A rack is necessary to keep the jars off the bottom of the canner and prevent breakage. After jars are placed on the rack, lower the rack down into the canner. There must be 1 to 2 inches of water above jars for proper water circulation during canning. If not, add more water, then place the lid on the canner. Processing begins when the water comes back to a full rolling boil. Set your timer according to the research-based recipe. When the timer goes off, processing is done, so turn off the heat, remove the canner lid, and wait 5 minutes to allow for cooling. Next, lift the rack out of the water and remove jars using a jar lifter, being careful not to tip them. The water on the lids will evaporate. Place the jars on a towel, cutting board, or rack to cool. After 12 to 24 hours, once jars have sealed, label each jar with the date and name of the product. If a jar did not seal, you have the option to reprocess using the same processing time, freeze, or place in the refrigerator and consume. To store your jars of canned food, remove the ring, place in a dry, dark area, and use within 1 year.
All right, so just a quick video synopsis showing you the steps to water bath canning. One thing you might be thinking is, those were carrots in that water bath canner, weren't they? But they were pickled carrots. So again, pickled products you can do in a water bath canner. They are considered high acid. So pickled asparagus, pickled Brussels sprouts, pickles, relishes, pickled carrots can all be water bath canned because they're high acid. Otherwise, they would be considered low acid if it was just carrots or just Brussels sprouts, which we'll see in a little bit. So I want to mention briefly our atmospheric steam canner option as well. Some of you may not be as familiar with this method, but it is an approved method for high acid foods as long as your research-based recipe indicates the processing time is less than 45 minutes. So if it is a product with a longer processing time than 45 minutes, you have to use your water bath canner. If it's less than 45 minutes, so if it's jams and jellies, which are normally 5 to 10 minutes, different products, then you could use your atmospheric steam canner if you had one and if you so choose. So with your atmospheric steam canner, let me go back for a second. You can see it looks a little bit different. It's got a very small base and then a large dome, so it doesn't take as much water. There is an altitude indicator, and you have to watch that during processing, as well as measure the temperature inside the canner, because the atmospheric steam canner processes with pure steam. So we have to make sure it stays at 212 degrees inside that canner. So there's a few more things to watch for with this, but it does use less water and can be handy as well. So to steam can, you would fill the steam canner with the water as recommended in the instruction manual. Normally it's about 2 to 3 quarts of water, so not as much as that water bath canner that's half full. You'll preheat the water in your steam canner. You'll place the filled jars on a canning rack. So every canner has a rack, and this one is no different. You can see the rack there. It's just a little metal circle with holes in it. Put the lid on the steam canner, and then you'll turn the heat on to high. And once you can easily read that altitude indicator knob and see that it reaches your altitude zone, then you would start your processing time. You'll also have to use a bimetallic stem thermometer and make sure in the porthole that you are monitoring that temperature for 212 degrees. And I'll show you a short video clip here for that as well. But again, you cannot do anything over 45 minutes. So if your research-based recipe is a longer processing time, use your water bath canner instead, because this could boil dry and not process your food safely after 45 minutes. So let's take a quick peek at what this looks like, just to give you an idea in case you might be interested in using an atmospheric steam canner.
I wanted to show you how the atmospheric steam canner worked. I filled the steam canner with 2.5 quarts of water. The water is just below the canning rack. I set my jars on the canning rack over the already hot water. I placed the dome lid on the canner base, covering the filled jars. I made sure the vent port was where I can see it. It is important to make sure the steam is exiting the vent port while processing. At the same time, I am watching the dial at the top of the atmospheric steam canner, so I will know when I can start timing process. Before the indicator needle reaches my elevation line, I am going to check the temperature, making sure the internal temperature reaches 212 degrees Fahrenheit. I place the biometallic thermometer in the vent port. I allow it time to register the temperature. After it has reached 212 degrees Fahrenheit, I remove the thermometer and watch the dial. Once the dial has reached my elevation line, I start the timing process. After the timer goes off and process has been reached, I turn off the heat, allow 5 more minutes for the canner to rest. Then carefully remove the dome and remove the jars and set them on a towel on the counter where they will not be disturbed. Allow them to cool for 12 to 24 hours.
Okay, so again, just to kind of give you an idea of what that looks like, what that canner looks like, you can purchase those online as well. I'm not sure that I've seen them locally in my stores, but you might run across them in a store that sells canning supplies and preserving supplies as well. So those are the two options for your high acid foods, water bath canning or atmospheric steam canning. Let's move into low acid foods. So low acid foods have a pH value higher than 4.6. So they include foods like all vegetables, except for most tomatoes, as well as meats, seafood, poultry, and any mixtures of low acid or high acid. Okay, so these are our low acid foods. And our low acid foods must be pressure canned, period. There's no way around it. We cannot water bath can low acid foods because of the risk of botulism. Botulism is a rare but potentially deadly illness caused by Clostridium botulinum, which is a bacteria. This bacteria is found in soil and can survive and grow and produce a toxin under certain conditions, like if food is improperly canned. So this toxin can affect your nerves, could cause paralysis, and unfortunately, it does cause death in some cases. What's tricky is you cannot see, smell, or taste the botulism toxin, the botulinum toxin. So you can't open a jar of something and see it or smell it or taste it. Just like you can't look at a hamburger you might eat for lunch or for dinner and see E. coli bacteria present. We can't see these bacteria with our eyes. So there have been cases of foodborne botulism after people ate home canned preserved foods that were improperly canned and contaminated with the toxin. So this is why with our vegetables and our meats, we have to use a pressure canner. We cannot water bath can them. The other option would be to freeze them. And some people enjoy doing that as well instead of canning. But with your pressure canners, there's 2 types of pressure canners recommended and approved for home use. a weighted gauge pressure canner and a dial gauge pressure canner. So we'll look at both of these, but remember both of these options, whether it's the dial or the weighted gauge, they have a rack in the canner. Every canner has a rack. They have pressure regulators and pressure indicators. They have vent pipes and petcocks to close and open for venting or pressurizing. They have safety valves and overpressure plugs, safety locks to pressurize, and they have a flexible gasket in the lid, unless you have the All-American pressure canner, which is a metal to metal seal. So let's look at the dial gauge for a moment. So the dial gauge pressure canner is good if you like to visually see what's happening. So it's got that gauge with the numbers, and you can visually see the numbers when it's pressurizing go up from 5 to 10 to 11 to 15 pounds of pressure. Your pressure canner lid is different than the water bath. The pressure canner lids actually lock into place. So you don't just set the lid on the pot, they lock into place. And the pressure canner has a vent pipe to exhaust your canner, which will then create or will even out the pressure inside the canner after you vent it and create a vacuum. Once the canner has been pressurized for 10 full minutes, that's when you put the weight on and the pressure starts to build. And then you'll see that number on your dial gauge go up and rise as the canner is pressurizing. And then once it gets to the pressure you need, that's when you would set your timer for processing. The canner does have a safety valve that will melt if the internal pressure becomes too high. And then when the plug melts, the interior pressure is released. So this plug prevents canners from blowing up. People have known those who have had issues years past related to canner incidents, and they have updated their safety valves with them. But one thing I recommend if you're going to be pressure canning or canning at all in the kitchen is we really have to just be focused. Watch what the canner is doing, watch the time, watch the processing, not try and be a multitasker, and now's not the time to do other things. We really need to focus on that canner and pay attention to it. And that will greatly cut down the risk of any issues you might have. Now, the weighted gauge has the same concept as far as how it locks, as far as having the rack in the bottom, but this one does not have that dial gauge. It has a weighted gauge. And so it might look like that round circle there that has a hole for 5, 10, or 15 pounds of pressure. It might look like the picture on the right where it's almost like a little puzzle. You put it together and there's different pieces for the 5, 10, or the 15 pounds. You do need to get to know your weighted gauge canner if you're going to use one or if you have one. You'll have to learn the gentle rocking sound or the jiggling and be able to recognize when it's ready for you to start your processing time. So you want to read your manufacturer's directions for sure to learn how that weight should rock or jiggle so you know what to listen for and what to watch for. People often ask, well, what's better, weighted gauge or dial gauge? And really it's a personal preference. Some people swear by their weighted gauge, want nothing to do with the dial gauge. A few of my colleagues are like that. It's weighted gauge or nothing for them. A lot of people like the dial gauge because they can see, again, visually those numbers. So it really is a personal preference, either what you grew up using or what you're used to using, or if you're going to get a new one, thinking about what you might prefer with the dial versus the weight. So processing in your pressure canner, you will have 2 to 3 inches of water simmering or hot in the canner, depending on if it's a hot pack food or a raw pack. You will have that rack in the bottom, and then you want to put your jars on the rack. And then once they're on the rack, you'll put that canner lid on and twist it into place. And then leave the weight off of the vent port. Leave the petcock open. And then turn the heat on to high. The next step is really important. And this has changed over the years with the recommendation and guidelines. The recommendation now is that we need to exhaust that canner for 10 full minutes. And what that means is once the water starts boiling inside, steam will start to come out of your vent. You left it open. Remember, we just said leave it open. So you need to wait until there's a steady stream of steam coming out of that vent port. And once there is, set your timer for 10 minutes. We need to let that vent for a full 10 minutes. So set it for 10 minutes. And then once the timer goes off, Then you will put the weight on. And as I said earlier, that's when the pressure will start to build inside your canner. So very, very important. Venting allows you to even out the pressure inside the canner. And again, it's another safety measure as well. So once you've vented it, then put the weight on, and then you can start your timing process once the dial gets up to 11 pounds of pressure, or once the weighted gauge jiggles and rocks as it's supposed to, then you start timing for your processing. So set the timer for, 35 minutes or 20 minutes, whatever your research-based recipe tells you. At the end of processing, let the pressure drop to 0 on a dial gauge. If you have a weighted gauge, they recommend waiting 30 to 45 minutes before you open that canner lid. Because again, there's no way for us to know how much pressure is still inside. With the dial gauge, we can see it go down, down, down to 0. And then wait another minute or two, and then remove the weight and open the petcock, and then wait another 10 minutes. So it takes some time. And again, these are safety features. We don't want to rush it. And then open the canner away from you, being careful of that steam that might be present. So I do want to show you here again a little video clip of what the dial gauge process looks like. We do have one for weighted gauge, and again, those links and resources that I share with Nina and she will share with you, you can watch some of the other videos as well. So this is using your dial gauge.
Pressure canning is the only method recommended by the U.S. Department of Agriculture for safely canning low-acid foods such as vegetables, meats, and fish. Low-acid foods must be canned at a temperature of 240 degrees Fahrenheit or higher and held there for the time specified in the recipe to destroy the bacterial spores naturally present in these foods. Pressure canning utilizes pressurized steam to reach this superheated temperature. This pressurized heat destroys the potentially harmful bacterial spores. Dial gauge canners have a dial on the top of the lid with numbers for monitoring the pressure as it builds and during processing. Dial gauges should be checked for accuracy every year. A rack goes on the bottom of all canners to prevent jars from sitting directly on the canner, which gets very hot and can cause jar breakage. Place your rack in the bottom of the canner. To use your pressure canner, first read the manufacturer's directions. Then add 2 to 3 inches or 2 quarts of hot water to the canner. Heat water to simmer. Next, place filled jars carefully on the rack using a jar lifter. Then place the lid onto the canner and lock into place. Now it's time to vent the canner. Leaving the weight off the vent port, turn the stove burner to its highest setting and heat the canner until steam flows from the vent. Let the canner steam until a steady stream of steam starts to flow from the valve. Once you have a steady stream, set a timer for 10 minutes. You will need to vent the canner for a full 10 minutes before pressurizing. Next, pressurize the canner by placing the weight on the vent port. As the canner pressurizes, you will see the needle increase on the dial gauge. Monitor the pressurizing so once it reaches the recommended pressure, you are ready to process. Set your timer according to the research-based recipe. Regulate the heat under the canner to maintain a steady pressure. If the pressure reading goes below the recommended pressure, bring the pressure back up and start the timing process again. Once the timer goes off, turn off heat to the canner. Pressure canners take time to depressurize after processing and before the lid can be opened. Wait until the needle drops to 0. After the canner is depressurized, remove the weight from the vent port. Unfasten the lid and remove it carefully. Open the lid away from you so that the steam does not burn you. Leave the jars in the canner for 10 minutes to keep liquid from leaking out. Then carefully remove the jars using a jar lifter by lifting them straight out of the canner. The water on the lids will evaporate. Place jars on a towel, cutting board, or rack to cool for 12 to 24 hours. After 12 to 24 hours, once jars have sealed, label each jar with the date and the name of the product. If a jar did not seal, you have the option to reprocess using the same processing time, freeze, or place in the refrigerator and consume. To store your jars of canned food, remove the rings, place in a dry, dark area, and use within 1 year.
Okay, Okay, so in the video there, you saw green beans. That's one very popular product that people pressure can in the summer is green beans. You might have also noticed there's a jar of venison. A lot of our hunters in the area, this fall will be pressure canning venison, chicken, beef, again, corn, potatoes, all of those sorts of vegetables would be pressure canned. So hopefully that kind of gave you an idea of what the process looks like if you're new to using a pressure canner. If it was a weighted gauge, it would look a tiny bit different as far as watching for that rocking and jiggling. But like I said, you can watch that video when when Nina sends the link out tomorrow. So just in summary, takes only a couple inches of water, and then you have to lock the lid into place, vent the canner for 10 full minutes. Then you put the weight on to pressurize. And once the pressure is at the proper recommended level, then you start your processing time. One thing with pressure canning is you have to monitor it. Like I said, you need to be focused and paying attention, because if the pressure drops during the processing time, you have to bring it back up to pressure and start the processing again. So you really can't, leave the kitchen and then come back, 20 minutes later and find out the pressure has dropped. You really need to, again, stay focused and stay present, because you would have to start all over again. Otherwise, you could have an underprocessed, unsafe product. And then, as the videos both said, after processing, you'll lift those jars straight up and out of the canner, whether it's water bath or pressure canner. Place them on a clean towel or a cooling rack. Let them cool for 12 to 24 hours. Normally, the sealing happens within the first hour. You'll hear the little pings and tings, little popping sound, and you can hear that many of your jars, and hopefully all of them, will seal. But at 12 to 24 hours, check for the seal. Label and date them if they've sealed, and then you can remove the ring bands. They do not need to be stored with them during storage. And as the video mentioned, reprocessing, let's say a couple jars don't seal. Hopefully that doesn't happen. If it's just one, maybe you just put it in the fridge and enjoy that, for dinner one of the next couple of days. If a few of them don't seal, maybe you do want to reprocess, use a new jar, a new lid, and do the processing time all over again. Or you can freeze the food, dump it out of your jars into a freezer container and freeze. That'd be another option. But it has to happen within 24 hours if you're going to reprocess. And then storage. Store these in a cool, dry, dark area. Again, you don't need to leave the rings on. Some people do, but again, you don't have to. They are sealed. You could take the rings off and use them. Let's say you're doing peaches like the picture shows. You do peaches this week. After you put them into storage, take the rings off. Next week, use them when you're going to get ready to can salsa or corn or green beans or whatever the case might be. And then store, up to a year. Over a year is fine as well, but we do recommend trying to only preserve what you and your family can enjoy in the next year. Not to say that, 1 year from today, whatever you preserved is going to be bad, but the quality will decrease the longer it spends. If it's 3, 4, 5 years. We've had people call and find things in their pantries and their basements that have been down there for many, many years. And again, quality becomes an issue, and as well as if it was preserved using a research-based recipe. So date them so you can use up your older items first, before you break into the new things you're canning and preserving this summer. So it's a lot of information. I know we went through a ton of information here, but we like to kind of give the overview to help people understand the differences between high acid versus low acid, understand the methods for water bath canning, atmospheric steam canning, or pressure canning. So you can think about, what you might like to preserve or try to preserve and what your options are. So put some questions in the Q&A if you'd like. This is a QR code to take a short evaluation survey, which we always ask our participants to do to help us make our programs even better and to collect some information on what you learned during our session today. And then look for that follow-up email from Nina with lots of resources and some links that you can check out for more information. And I will send the evaluation link in that as well. So if you don't get to it today, right now, you can look for it in your email. And then always call the hotline if you have questions. We'll send this information too. And follow us on Facebook. You'll get lots and lots of preserving information and tips. So I'll turn over to Carol and we'll see if we have any questions and we'll go from there.
Well, thank you, Laurie. So as Laurie's taking down her information, I'll be putting up our last slide. If you still have questions, you can put them in the question and answer section. Let's look at our first one here. Oh, I'm seeing a little note in here saying the chat is disabled. Yeah, the chat is disabled, but questions should be put in the question and answer section. So I'm having a little difficulty getting this last slide up. I apologize for that. Let's see if that looks a little better now. Well, it is just one of those days where technology is not doing what we want. So we will just, the last slide is information about Laurie and me, and you've already had some of that. I do have another question here for you, Laurie. You said that the metal rings or the screw bands can be reused. What about the lids themselves? Can they be reused?
So Carol, it depends on, or whoever asked that question, it depends on what you buy. If they're the one-time use lids, then no, those cannot be reused. You'll use them for preserving your jar, and then when you go to open your jar, at whatever point you're going to use that product, you would discard those lids. There is a couple of companies that have a reusable canning lid. They have been doing some research and testing on those. And there's still some kind of mixed results on, or not results, mixed opinions on those. They work quite a bit differently, as you need to actually keep track of how many times you use them, because they can only be used a certain number of times. So if you are choosing to try and use a reusable type lid, you'll need to read the directions carefully that come with those, so you can make sure you use those properly and hopefully not have additional failures with your sealing of those jars due to not using them properly. So the ones we usually just recommend the one-time lids, and those are one-time use.
Thank you. There is a question here. Well, it looks more like a comment. I finally bought a canning kit, well worth the money. I joined late. I'm not sure if you talked about that.
Yeah, I talked about pieces of the canning kit, so the headspace measure and the jar lifter. But yes, those canning kits are very helpful. None of it's required. You can certainly do without, but if you do have some extra money and plan to do a lot of preserving, the jar lifter is very helpful. The headspace measure, the bubble freer, often it comes with a funnel. Sometimes it comes with tongs. It kind of depends on what kit you purchase, but yeah, definitely if you're planning to do a lot of canning, those tools can be very helpful and very useful.
So one more quick question here. You mentioned about finding research-based recipes. How often do we need to look for them? Do we need new ones every year, every 5 years? How often do we have to look for that?
I'd recommend that every time you're going to preserve, when you're getting ready to pull out a recipe for whatever you might be choosing to can, that you look for a research-based recipe for that. The research-based recipes haven't changed a lot. They do go through and update our resources, and usually a couple of them will change with each update. So they're always there and they're always available. And if you're looking to try something new, I would make sure to find a research-based recipe. If you're starting out, if you've been doing it for many years, maybe check and make sure the recipe you have been using is one of our recommended recipes. And again, there's lots and lots and lots of them, and lots of options with them. So check your Vol Blue Book, check those websites that we'll share tomorrow, and you can definitely find and make sure that what you have is good to go.
So then if I bought that, what was it? So easy to preserve this year, that's good for a few years.
Yeah, that one was updated. Gosh, I'd have to look back. So they do update them frequently enough. I mean, maybe every 5 years, 6 years. So you could always check their website to make sure you have the current version. as well.
And I see that someone put in a thank you to us both here. So
You're
I will
welcome.
try to share that last slide one more time and see if it's going to cooperate with me. Lost my mouse. Well, that is still not wanting to share, so I am just going to thank everyone who attended. We're really pleased that you were here. I want to thank Laurie especially for sharing all of the great information that she's gathered over the years that she's been teaching this. And I'd like to remind everyone that Healthy Living Together brings monthly webinars, or sometimes in person. We're starting to get back to doing the in-person ones again. And the next one will be September 20th, and that's organizing tips. And those are by Connie Kramer. So we'll look forward to having you join Healthy Living Together next month on September 20th. Thanks for joining us.